Hello, this is David Ward, and welcome to another Blender Cookie tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to build a little rocket and then use the smoke settings to give it a trail as it's flying through the sky. So, let's jump in here and get started. So let's go ahead and just build a quick little rocket. We're going to delete the original cube. Shift A. We're going to let's add a cone, and then come over here to our add cone options here, and we don't need 32. Let's just give it 12, and that'll be good. Cap the end, make sure that's turned on. So good. Okay, now let's tab into edit view, grab our edge select tool and deselect everything. Actually, get our vertex select, and well, select everything, deselect the point there on the bottom. Now our edge select, hold on Alt and Shift and right click on that edge right there, so we have only these sides selected. Now we're going to go W, subdivide, and let's give that a couple of, and let's do 4 is probably fine for now. Okay, then we'll go back into front view, grab our vertex select, and let's grab this bottom one, scale it down. And we're basically just going to sculpt this into a long tube shape with a pointed end, as you know a rocket typically looks like. This might look more like a bomb that you would drop rather than an actual missile, because missiles are typically more sleek and slender. But just for the fun, we'll make this a nice fat bomb. So okay, let's get the exhaust area down here, and let's scale that up just a little bit, and let's add one more break in there, and then maybe one right here. Or maybe we want it to taper up. Let's go ahead and turn on our smooth so we can kind of see what this looks like as we're going. Go to our modifiers, go ahead and give it a subdivision surface. There we are. Gonna see what this is gonna look like. Period button on your numpad so you can center it up in the scene. And let's jump in here and add some more detail. We added this extra loop here. Let's add another loop in the middle there. And just scale it down so we have a nice separation. Maybe add another loop here so it's a sharper edge there and there. And now let's grab all of these down here. Make sure you got the bottom part selected. And go ahead and hit E to extrude, and then just right click to cancel out, or to accept it, I guess. And then just scale it down. And then we're going to extrude up on the Z axis. Scale it down. Maybe a little further up. Okay, now let's add one more loop down there, and then one on the inside. Down there, so we got a nice sharp edge, well, relatively sharp edge there on the end. So, okay, so now this is looking pretty good. Let's add a tip to our little rocket here. Scale that up. Do the same thing we did down on the exhaust area, the rocket part. Scale this down, and there, and there. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now it can't stand by itself. It needs some little fins on it. So let's tab back into edit mode, hit Shift A, and let's go ahead and add a cube. Move it over to the side here. Now let's go to our top view, 7 on your numpad. Scale it on the Y-axis till it's really thin, about like so. Then we'll zoom in a little bit, add a couple of loops in there. Just one is probably good. There we go. Go back to our side view, and let's grab our face select. Make sure we got nothing selected, and then select that. W, subdivide that. Twice should be fine. Okay, now we're gonna shape this to be, Control L to select all those. Shape it to be not only the fins for the rocket, but also the supports for it when it's standing upright on the ground. So did that? Okay, that didn't subdivide the edge there. So tell you what, go ahead and, well, before we delete the whole thing, tell you what, let's delete the back part of it, everything except for the front. There we go. Delete those guys. Now we just have the one plane there. And tell you what, let's go ahead and shape it up, and then we'll thicken it up back after we get it the way we want. One less thing to worry about. So let's grab these guys here, move those up, and let's go up above the actual rocket exhaust area. Just kind of shape this however you like. About like so. And then bring this guy over to there. Maybe we'll bring these a little further out. And like I said, you can really just make this look however you want to. It's in a 3D world, so it doesn't really have to be functional. So, I mean, you want it to look functional, but you know, it doesn't have to be 100%. So let's add one more loop down here. There we go, and maybe that'll work. Let's go with that. Maybe add a loop right here just to maybe give it a little bit of style. There we go. Okay, now we'll select everything. Control L, and let's go ahead and extrude it. Let's go to our side view and extrude it back on the y-axis a little bit. Not wanting to work. E extrude. There we go. Must have hit the wrong button. Just a little thickness there, and then go ahead and pop in here and add another loop there just for posterity's sake. And now we need to go ahead and smooth on the shading again. There we are. Okay, so now we need to copy this fin over to the other side. And let's grab one of them, Control L, and let's put our 3D cursor right there on the center of our little rocket and hit the period button so we rotate around it. And we're going to Shift D to duplicate those guys and rotate 180 degrees. There we go. Or if you wanted to, you could scale it on the x-axis -1 and it'd do the same thing. So now let's select both of them, Shift D, and rotate 90 degrees. There we go. Now we have 4 of them. So there we are. They might be a little big to the size of the actual rockets, so let's see. Tell you what, let's grab this. Since we still have the 3D cursor down here, still scaling around it, let's scale it up, but not necessarily on all axes. Let's just do it on the z-axis so it makes it longer. About like that. And maybe I always laugh at myself because I do stuff that could probably work fine and then I just keep going in and editing it. So maybe move all those up. And I think that'll work. That'll be fine. Okay, now let's make it look a little prettier than just a gray clay blob. We're going to go in here and let's go to our top view. Let's grab, say, I'll tell you what. Let's just grab both sides there. Control E, and we're going to mark a seam. And then let's grab one edge of our each fin there. Excuse me. Just one edge there, and maybe the bottom as well. And Control E, mark seam. You know what? To save a little bit of time, instead of trying to grab all the edges, I'll just select all those, delete them, and come back up here. Do the same thing. Just copy. Shift D, rotate 180. Control L, Shift D, rotate 90. There we go. And now they all have the seams on them already. Okay. So, looking good. Tell you what, let's separate our rocket area right there. Control E, mark that seam, and the tip of the cone area, or the tip of the rocket, the cone. Oops, wrong button. There we go. Control E. There we go. Okay, so now we have our rocket nicely mapped out. Say, we better save this, huh? Save as, and let me go to my Blender files, test scenes. There we go. Let's just call this. You know what? Let me make a. Actually, I have a folder here, I think. No? Create a new directory. Yes. And we'll say rocket. And let's go in there and call this rocket. Save as Blender file. There we are. Okay. Now let's paint him up real quick. I know the main part of this tutorial is the smoke part, but you know we want to have a good presentation too. So let's separate our window here. There we are. And go to the UV image editor, grab our model, shift into or tab into edit mode. unwrap our UVs, and then come over here to UVs and average their scale, and then pack them, and there we go. Okay, now, I'm not really, to save a little bit of time, I'm just going to give this, well, I was going to say I was going to give it some different materials, but I don't know if that'll save time in the end. So, tell you what, let's just jump into texture paint. Let's paint the tip of it kind of an orangey color, like so. And tell you what, let's go to turn these guys off. Actually, we're going to need to make a new image. So, since it's just going to be basic, this will be fine, 1024 by 1024. Okay, and black will be fine for now. And texture paint, go to texture. Okay, so I can see what I'm doing. Well, okay, have to have the new image as part of the UV maps. There we go. So just paint the tip of it, and you know what? Let's come back to object mode. Grab our light here, duplicate him around here so we can kind of see what we're doing as far as the painting goes. So there we go. Texture paint. Now then, does not want to paint the tip of that, so let's just come over here to our actual image. Go to image painting there, paint the tip there, and should be good. Okay, and also the fins, I want to paint orange. I know it's kind of getting messy here, but we'll clean it up shortly. Paintbrush needs to be 100%. There we go. And this guy. Go ahead and go back over that. Okay. Now we need to paint the body of it. Let's make it kind of off-white. Not quite white, but kind of a little bit of a tannish white. About like so. Okay. And if we try to paint in here, we might accidentally paint over one of our things we want orange. So let's come over here to this window where we can get a little bit more meticulous. And let's set our curve up to be a little bit straighter on the edge there instead of fading out so much. And there we go. Just paint carefully in there. Paint all that. And then all this. Good. Oops, kind of overpainted part of it. Okay, just right click there and it'll select the orange, as you can see. I'm going to zoom in here and get that part back right there. There we go. And still got a little bit of cleanup on some of these guys. Almost there, and there we go. Okay, so let's save this, and we're already in the correct folder, so we'll say rocket texture map, and we'll save. Okay, now one more thing I want to do on my texturing here. Let's go ahead and merge those windows. Actually, not yet. Don't merge them yet. Cancel that. Let's go ahead and create this texture here. Come to our Materials tab, New, say Rocket. There we go. Go to our Texture Settings, New, Image or Movie, and we'll click the thumbnail there, say Untitled. That's the name of this one. We'll go ahead and title it Rocket Texture. There we go. And collapse that. Mapping needs to go to UV. There we go. And the color. So now we're all set. So if we were to render now, go back to object mode, set our camera up, render it out, boom, there we go. It's a little too shiny, I think. So let's fix that real quick. Set the intensity, intensity down and the hardness down. I like to use the monkey head as reference. Seems like you can see a better representation of how the sheen looks. Yeah, this looks better. Okay. Now, one more thing I want to do is I want to load in the Blender Cookie logo onto our rocket there. So, let me open that image up, And that's going to be just in my general Blender folder here. Where's that? Blender cookie logo. There, PNG. There we go. Open that image. See, there it is. And let's go ahead and go to our texture settings here and add another one. And this also is going to be image or movie. There it is. Okay, go to our image here, hit the thumbnail, and now we're going to say Blender cookie logo. Come down here, go ahead and say pre-multiply. And for the purpose of this tutorial, since I have this image on another folder on my hard drive to include it with the downloadable package for you guys, I'll just go ahead and click on that little icon right there, and it packs this image into the Blender file, so you don't even need the source file. So you know what? Let me do that with the other one as well, just so you have them. There we go. And then if you later on you want to edit it some more, you just click on that again, and it'll give you options. You can remove the pack, or you can create this texture into this folder, and it'll separate it out from the Blender file, and you can edit it, you know, and pack it again later on if you want to. So go ahead and mouse out there so I don't worry about it. But let's click on that guy. And first thing I want to do is go ahead and come down to mapping. Go ahead and set that to UV as well. And go to image mapping. Instead of repeat, we want a clip. We just want the one image. We don't want it tiled on there. So now if I tab into edit mode and I load in the Blender cookie logo here, you can kind of see it there, and it's way stretched out. Where I want to put it is on what'll be the white area. So what I want to do, actually, I don't want to rearrange the current UV layout because we have the orange and white painting for the rocket there. So what I want to do is go to our object data, and let's create a new UV map, and let's call this one for logo. Okay, and now we're going to come over here and come out of image painting so we can actually edit it. And what it did when we just added a new one, it basically copied the layout of the other. So what I want to do is rotate this 90 degrees. Actually, just rotate it 90 degrees. Scale it up until we have the Blender cookie logo right there on the edge of the rocket. We can kind of get an idea what it's looking like over here. I guess it's going to be this guy right here. So let's move it up there a little bit better. Maybe scale a little bigger. About right there. And now I also want it to be on the other side, but I want it to be a mirror image. So if the rocket's flying and the bite mark is at the tip, towards the tip, I want it to be the opposite on the other side where the bite mark is still towards the tip. So what I want to do is grab this guy, which is the other side of the rocket, Control L, and I'm going to scale that one on the y-axis, -1. Oops, what I need to do, I have the proportional editing turned on. Let's go ahead and disable that. Excuse me, and go ahead and do that again. -1. There we go. Drag it into the same area as the other guy. There we go. So now you can see we have it correct on this side and on this side. So that'll work, I think. So now let's make sure we have, we're going to show the alpha there. Good. So if I did everything correctly, we should see the original texture map here with this Blender cookie logo overlaid. So let's do that. And it didn't. I think the order here is very important, so let's pop that up to the top and see if that works well. Okay. Tell you what, let me play with this for a minute and then I'll be right back. Okay, silly mistake. Since I created the new UV map for our logo here, I have to tell the texture settings that I need to use that new UV map. So you go to image or mapping. There we go. Still UV, but remember we made the new one for logo. There we go. Render out. Boom. There we have it. So you can make any, you know, decal or whatever you want to on your rocket there, and it'll look nice and pretty once you get it. So okay. Now 20 minutes later we'll jump into the smoke settings. So let's go ahead and collapse all this stuff, kill the rotation of that guy. Let's come to our solid setting instead. Now first thing we want to do, go ahead and get rid of some of these lights, and well, delete that guy there we go. Let's grab this light here, go ahead and turn it into a sun lamp. There we go. And let's go ahead and turn on the sky and atmosphere. And pretty much a sun, anywhere in your scene, it's going to light up the whole scene because it imitates this, the sun in the sky. So even though it's right here by our model, if we move our model way over here, it's still going to light it up with the same shadow direction and the same everything because the sunlight is pointing in that particular direction. So let me clear that out. Okay, move him up a little bit to where he's resting on that ground plane. Actually, it doesn't really matter because he's going to be flying through the sky. So let's control comma, so we're rotating around the model instead of the 3D point. Okay, now, first thing I said, the 20th thing I want to do, Shift A, we're going to add a cube, and I want to set it to where I can see my scene solidly, but still see through the cube. So let's go to our object settings right there, and come down to display. Instead of textured, set it to wire. We're going to scale it way up. Now, one thing you might have problems with, that I had problems with when I was playing with this, is if you want a very thin smoke trail, like we want our rocket going blah, 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 with a thin smoke trail following it, it's going to be difficult to do because the more distance your rocket's traveling, and you want smoke to be there that whole distance, the bigger your domain has to be. So the bigger your domain, the bigger the smoke is going to be. So unless there's a way to change that later on, the only way I found now is the only way to change the size of the smoke is to give it a higher resolution, which, if you have a really big space you're wanting to fly through, that's going to be a really high resolution, and it could eat up a lot of your computer when you're trying. It might even crash a few times. But anyways, we'll make it relatively small, just big enough to encompass that. And another way you can get around is some of those problems with the smoke being too big of an area is kind of do some handy camera tricks, where you just put the camera on, basically keep the rocket still, but kind of just move it around, rotate it around, and just have the camera right there by it where it looks like the rocket's traveling through space, but it's really kind of sitting still, and maybe the camera moves or, whatever. So anyways, so we got our domain. Now what I want to do is have the rocket kind of just come through here and kind of do a loop-de-loop and, finish up on the other side of the domain there. So what I want to do is, let's grab our rocket, Shift D, oops, not Shift D, let me delete that, I duplicated it by accident. We're going to go Shift S and say cursor to selected, and it puts the 3D cursor, it wasn't selected, I did it again, Shift D, delete, Shift S self, there we go, cursor to selected. Okay, now Shift A, and we're going to add a curve. It's going to be a Bezier curve, and we'll tab into edit mode. Let's scale it way up, and you can kind of see the arrows on it that's pointing the direction of the curve. So let's rotate that around, and let me grab this point here at the very beginning, and I'm going to Shift S, selection to cursor. There we go. So it's starting off at the very exact same place that the rocket is, which is what we want, because we're going to have the rocket follow along this curve. So let's set this up. And let's grab both ends, and we're going to subdivide it. And let's kind of just make this a nice, smooth path for the rocket to travel on. Okay, so he's going to come around and just do a loop-de-loop circle right there. Maybe a little bigger. And then maybe we'll just extrude the tip of that and have him just come straight up after he's done messing around with the loop-de-loop. He can come straight up. There we go. Okay, so now, oops, it's a little odd right there. Let's fix that. Nice smooth traveling path. There we go. Okay, now, one issue I've run into when I do path constraints is sometimes it's a little odd, it seems. But if you play with it, you can usually get it right. So let's grab our rocket, shift select our path. We're going to go Control P to parent to the, follow path and path constraint kind of confuses me sometimes. Let's try path constraint first and see if that works, and it doesn't look like it does. So let's grab the model here, go to our constraints here, and constraints, not there. So let's go ahead and delete that. Okay, and we'll do the same thing. Control P, follow path, see if that works. There we go. Now, when you do the follow path, it doesn't add a constraint. I guess what it does is it makes it the parent, the Bezier curve there, and if you want to get the path off of there, just select that and just delete it, and boom, it's gone. So, Control P, follow path. There we go. Okay. Now we want it to, start off where we originally had it. For some reason, it moved it when we added the parent. So we'll just go Shift S, no, Alt. Grab the guy. Shift S. There we go. Cursor to select, grab the point there at the beginning. Cursor is selected. Now, selection of cursor. There we go. And let's rotate him to where he's right there on the line. So he's following it. There we go. Okay, so now, if we take a look, he's following along. Looks kind of cool. Okay, so let's grab our camera. And tell you what, let's come into our top view. Click in here, up here beside the rocket, Shift A. Shift A, there we go, and add an empty. Grab our camera, Shift select the empty, Control T, and track to constraint. So now we can control where the camera is looking just by moving the empty around. So let's have him kind of starting off there, watching the rocket. And let's hit our record button there. Just move it around just a little bit so it puts a keyframe in. Move it up here, and have him kind of watching. And actually that rocket's moving way too fast, and we can control that by selecting the actual Bezier curve, going to our curve settings there. And it's only going to follow the path animation for 100 frames. But we have 250 frames here, which honestly 250 is probably a little much. Let's set that down to 150. Okay. And then we also need to make the frames of the path animation to 150, and that'll narrow it down to where it takes 150 frames rather than 100 frames. So, grab our point there and come to this keyframe right there, so we can kind of adjust accordingly. Follow it down, and then back up. Okay. So now, gotta put the sound effects in there. Okay, so there we go. Now we got the rocket moving. We need to give him some smoke. So tell you what, let's jump into front view here. Shift A. We're going to add a new mesh. It's going to be a circle. And we don't need 32 vertices, so let's set that to 12. Radius can be a lot smaller too, so rotate around here so we can see. About right there probably. Go and fill it. There we go. And let's move it into position there behind the rocket, or about where it would be, if it was spitting out the particles, which it's going to do. Let's kind of just get that lined up in there just right. Okay, so there we go. So speaking of particles, actually before we do that, let's go ahead and parent it to our rocket. So we got it selected, shift select the rocket, Control P to the object. There we go, and it'll follow along. You can see it up in there. It's going to follow along with the rocket. Okay, so now grab the circle there again. Let's tell you what. Let's go into our bring up your properties panel there, and let's come down here and let's just go ahead and rename it to Rocket Expulsion. There we go. And let's go ahead and grab the rocket. Name that rocket. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and grab the big cube that we made earlier. Call that domain. There we go. Go ahead and save this. Now, grab our expulsion there and add a particle system to it. And now, under emission, we need to change the lifetime to 1. And the end can be 200 is fine, but we could change it to 150. Yeah, might as well. Starting at frame 1, ending at 150. There we go. Let's come down here to the velocity and change the normal. Let's make it 5. And then A couple more things we got to do down here. If we just render it now, it's going to render a little halo, little glowy dots there where the particles are coming out. We don't want that, so set that to none. It's not going to render anything of the particles. And we also don't want to see that circle by accident, so go ahead and turn off the emitter. Okay, so that's all set up. It's going to render fine. But the display, we would still like to see what the particles are doing. So under display, and right now it's displaying rendered, which is nothing, so it's not going to display anything. So I need to change that to point. So if we zoom in here, get it close enough view, you can kind of see some of those particles in there. There they are, kind of following along. Okay, and speaking of, let's give it quite a bit more. Right now it has 1,000. Let's multiply that by 10, give it 10,000. There we go. And if we back up, you can kind of see, well, maybe if we zoom in, kind of see some of those particles coming out a little bit. Okay. Now, the actual smoke. Grab our domain. Go to the physics settings. Go ahead and turn on smoke. There we go. And select domain. And let's set the divisions to 60 right now. Depending on how powerful your computer is, you can bump that up a little bit, or if you don't have a very strong computer. The higher, well, it goes hand in hand with any type of resolution settings. The higher the resolution, the more memory it's going to take up, the slower it's going to be. So, if you have a monster computer, you can set it up to 90, whatever. We'll set it to 60 for now. And now, we got the domain fairly well set up. Let's grab our rocket expulsion there and go ahead and give it a smoke setting as well. And this is going to be a flow. And go ahead and set initial velocity. And okay, that's about all we need to do for that. Go ahead and grab our domain again. And we don't want the smoke to stay around. We want it to kind of fade out the further the rocket goes. So let's set dissolve. We don't want it to fade out right away. We want to give it a little bit of time, maybe a second or two, to get kind of just, dissipate, just kind of fade out. So let's give it the frames per second basically for Blender these days. I used to set it at 30 frames per second, but nowadays it's about 24, 25. So let's set it to 25 frames. So it takes it about a second to start fading out. So okay, so now everything's all set up. Let's go ahead and save. If we hit the play button or Alt-A, whichever you want to do, we'll start seeing some smoke come out. And like I said, the bigger you make your domain, the bigger the smoke's going to be. So, starting to curve around there. So if we want smaller smoke, after it kind of bakes it in, you can kind of just play a little quicker. But we can't see our rocket at all there. The smoke's too big. So, oh, one other thing. The reason the smoke is coming out like that, because the expulsion probably needs to be rotated around the other direction. So let's tab, or not tab in, but hit Z so we can see the wireframe. And let's rotate it around to where it's pointing the other direction. There we go. Okay, so now, go back to solid view. Now if we hit play, you see that it's kind of behind the rocket a little bit better now. Zoom out quick enough. Or actually, it kind of looks about like the same, doesn't it? But, let's see what happens when we up the resolution there. Let's get to our settings here. I'm going to set it to 90. We'll see how long that takes. It's a little bit smaller, but still encompassing the rocket. That's not. I shouldn't be doing that. Tell you what, let's add a force field. Let's put our 3D cursor up here, Shift A. We're going to add a force field, and it's going to be the wind. Okay, now let's come to our side view. Set the wind up there. Right now it's pointing straight up. I want to rotate it, rotate it so it's pointing back like so. And let's set the strength to 7, maybe 8. So it's going to have a strong wind. So now let's move it up into here. Okay, back up. Play. Maybe it'll look a little bit better. Huh, looks like that smoke is still encompassing the rocket itself for some reason. It's pointing the other direction than it should be. So let's grab that, if we can find it. It's kind of hard to see inside the smoke there. There we go. And yeah, it's pointing towards the front of the rocket, which is... Oh, I think I see what I did. I have the automatic keyframe insertion turned on, so I think I might have... Pointing, yeah, zoom in here, you can see the 2 keyframes there. So I'll tell you what, let's Alt-I, delete that keyframe, come up to this one, delete that one too, and go ahead and turn off that. Sometimes I forget to turn it off and it kills me. Okay, so there, now we go. Alright, so now it should be pointing in the right direction. Yes, much better. Okay, now let's look at our camera and go ahead and play it. And as you saw, since I made the resolution a little bit higher, the trail is quite a bit smaller. So that's good. And the wind over here is going to be blowing it back as it dissipates. Okay, so let's just take a look at this, see what it's going to look like when we render. Go ahead and pause it, if it'll let me. There we go. Sometimes it doesn't want to let you pause because it's eating up all the RAM. Anyways, if we hit F12, you don't see anything. Why? Well, because our cube here is taking up a lot of space. Or it's not taking up space, it's just we need to set it up to where it's actually rendering the smoke instead of the cube. So let's jump to our material settings here. Set a new one, and let's call this one smoke. Okay, and it needs to be a volume setting there. And let's set the density down to 0. And what that does is it makes, if you set it to 1, it's going to render, or anything above 0 at all, it's going to render the cube. But if we set it to 0, it's going to start rendering the volumetrics inside the cube. So set it to 0. Density scale, let's put that about to 5. Scattering, let's put that to 5 as well. Emission 1. And reflection, that we'll leave that as is. I'll kind of go over these a little bit here in a second. Let's go to our texture settings here and create a new one. Instead of clouds, set it to voxel data. There we go. And the domain object is going to be domain, which you would think, since we're setting that material to that, it would already know that, oh, this is the domain. But anyways, you set that to domain and come down here to influence and select density. So now when we render, we should see our nice blue sky from the sun setting there. Our rocket up here. Why is he all black? I don't know. Let me see our smoke trail. Okay, so that's how you get the smoke. The rocket itself should be rendering with our texture map. Let me pause recording and kind of play with that, see if I can figure out why it's not rendering out. So stand by. Okay, quick easy fix yet again. Since it's inside the domain and we have the volumetrics of the domain, we still need to tell the rocket to not receive the shadows that the box around it's throwing because it's transparent. So we need to come down here to our material settings. Okay, scroll all the way down to shadow and check the box that says receive transparent. And then, as you can see, it's rendering the texture map now. So, okay, so that's basically that. The smoke doesn't look very good right now, so let's kind of play with that a little bit. Let's go up to our physics settings again. Like I said, we can up the divisions, which will help. But another thing we need to do to have nice looking smoke is right here, smoke high resolution. Go ahead and check that box. And you could go ahead and up the visions here, but again, the more resolution you go, the slower it's going to be. So for these purposes of this tutorial, we'll just leave it at 1. Let's go ahead and rewind all the way and go ahead and hit play again. And you can already see that it looks a little bit more detailed since we set the high resolution there. So I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and pause. You could leave it going. You could leave it playing if you want to see the whole shebang. But we'll just, I'm trying to get the look of it right now, so I'll just go ahead and hit F12 so I can see it render. Okay, it's looking pretty decent. A couple of things we can do with the material settings to make it look even better. Let's go and escape out here and go to our materials here. And like I said, I was going to go over this. The density scale is basically the thickness of our smoke. If we set it to like 0.5, it's not going to be very thick. It's going to be very transparent. So maybe if you're putting this smoke on, this smoke effect on, say, like you have a shower scene and you want some steam to be coming up, you could set the density scale pretty low and it would be real transparent. But for smoke, we want it to be fairly thick. So we'll leave that at 5, or maybe even make it 7. You could go up pretty much as high as you want, but again, but with the size of the domain, the density scale also affects. The higher you have the density, the bigger the smoke is going to be, because it's going to fill all the way out to the edges of it. So if you set the density scale, it's going to be a little thinner and a little more transparent. Now the shading on the scattering, that's basically how much the color of light coming through the smoke. So if you have it, or not the color, but the amount of light coming through the smoke. So if you set this, let me rephrase that. It's not the amount of smoke coming through, it's the amount that is dissipated inside the smoke. So this also affects the thickness of it, if that makes sense. The emission is for if you want to turn this into a fire, you'd set the emission real high so it's actually glowing, basically. Asymmetry I haven't messed with a whole lot, but it kind of throws off the scattering versus the emission, I guess. If you mouse over it, forward scattering and a range in between. But I don't really mess with that because, like I said, I haven't messed with it a lot. But anyways, reflection is basically the amount or the color that's coming off of the smoke. Right now it's white, so we're going to see a white tint to the smoke. So if we made that blue, for example, actually since our background is blue, let's make it red. We're going to have red smoke, and the transmission is the light coming through it. So if we set that to kind of a pinky color and we render out, we should have a red tinted smoke. There we go. So if you wanted that to look a little thicker, let's set the scattering up to, let's put that to 10, and set the reflection to, let's make that 3. And now should be a nice, more thicker looking smoke with a brighter red tint to it. But what rockets have red smoke? None that I know of. Well, unless it's Independence Day or here in the United States, or firecrackers, whatever. But anyways, let's change it back to white and white, and then maybe set the scattering up a little bit more. Let's make that 15 and see what that looks like now. Okay, so that's looking pretty decent. You can keep playing with those settings if you want. One thing I'm seeing right now is some little pixelation area right up in here. You might be able to see that. There we go. Zoom in a little bit. You can see it. A couple things we can do to take care of that is come down here to the integration and set the step calculation to a smaller number. Right now it's 0.2. So let's set that to 0.1. And if my memory serves, that should make that a little bit more dissipated. Yeah, it's a little bit better. And I think also what we can do, let's go ahead and escape out, is when we render, set our anti-aliasing to 5 and change that to full sample. I think that might help out there. I can't remember exactly. Let's see what it looks like. Also, when you're playing with smoke in Blender here and you turn on the full sample, what it's going to do is going to basically render out the whole scene invisibly, and then once it finishes, you can see right now it's on part 44 of 64. Once it finishes 64 of 64, it'll show the full scene and then calculate the full sample anti-aliasing. That kind of helped, kind of blurred it a little bit, but so anyways, that's basically how you get that. Said all that to say this. I'll tell you what, just so you can see the final effect I'll let it calculate out the rest of the smoke while the recorder is paused, and then I'll start recording again. You can see what it looks like once it gets through the whole shebang of the loop-de-loo there. So stand by, and you'll see some magic when I come back. Okay, here we are back, and it's finished the loop-de-loo, so I'll go ahead and let you take a look at that. Let's make it a little bit bigger here so we can see it bigger on screen. There we go. Taking off, flying around. Now, you can obviously see the edges of my domain, so be careful when you do that and make your domain a little bit wider, a little bit taller maybe, so the smoke doesn't creep along the edges of it like that. So that's that. That's kind of a quick, easy way to make a nice looking smoke effect. And we can look at it through here. You don't have to look at it through the camera to see it. But you can see this. The wind that we set up is blowing it back too as we go. So there we are. Okay. Well, that's going to be it for this tutorial. Hopefully you learned a thing or two. Hopefully I didn't get too boring with what it was I was trying to teach in the short time that ended up being 47 minutes. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.